Morning.
Good morning.
And I love that every time I come, there's one or two more people coming back. And eventually the Lord will see fit to bring all of our people home. Amen. Heather said she had a screen full on Zoom Sabbath School this morning. So we definitely have half of us here and half of us scattered out there. And the Lord is with all of us this morning. Amen. He's not contained in just this room or their homes. So I want to start with a story by Bob Goff. Anyone know Bob Goff? Have ever read his books? His book, Love Does, was a bestseller, sold millions and millions of those books. And with the profits, he has set up orphanages and hospitals and ways to help people, mostly in Africa. But I have just been reading his second little book called Everybody Always. And it's full of quirky stories about Bob's extraordinary life. And he tells a story about a time when he needed patience. Do any of you ever need patience? No. And he begins with a question: how is your life working? Not for you, but for the people who live with you. How is your life working for those closest to you? And Bob confesses that he is always in a hurry. He says he puts on his socks 2 at a time, and he laces his tennis shoes while he runs, and he orders sushi at restaurants so he doesn't have to wait to have the fish cooked. And he doesn't even like sushi. And when he's not in a hurry, he spends his downtime being impatient that there's nothing to do. So one day he asked his family, "How is my life working for you?" And he found out that his impatience was driving them nuts. When he read a kid's book with the premise that we all become what we put into our life buckets. So he knew he needed a bucket full of patience. So he went to the hardware store and bought a real one, a large metal bucket. And he decided he would carry it with him everywhere as an experiment to remind himself that God would help him have a bucket full of patience. He took it in the car, on his sailboat, and in the subway. He looked like a dairy farmer. People on airplanes asked him if he had a bladder problem. "Actually, I do," he'd explain, "but I have an even bigger problem. I'm really impatient." Well, he goes to speak at churches and in events all over the U.S. and all over the world. One day he was invited to go and speak in Austin, Texas. When he agreed to the appointment, he hadn't realized it was Super Bowl weekend. He hates football, but he loves the Super Bowl because he really likes eating nachos and watching the ads with his wife, who he always calls Sweet Maria. So even though he travels incessantly, Bob always tries to be home every night. He lives in San Diego, but he worked in Seattle for years and still made it home every night for dinner. So he spoke in Austin, several services at a megachurch, and then was headed home. He jumped into his rental car and bolted for the airport. If all went well, he would eat nachos and see the end of the game with Sweet Maria. There were 2 lines in the rental car return. He chose his line and began waiting. Nothing happened for 10 minutes. So he craned his neck out the window to see what was the holdup. And the attendant was staring into the air. After 5 more minutes without moving, he let out an exasperated, "Really?" The other line was moving along just fine. In fact, they had all passed through. He was more than a little peeved. He doesn't deny it. And then the cold realization sunk in. He got that guy. Have you ever got that guy or that lady when you get into a line at the grocery store and everybody else is moving and they just are taking forever? You know the one he's talking about. The only gears he seemed to have were slow, stop, and reverse. If you watched the Pixar film Zootopia, like the sloths in Zootopia, the car ahead of him inched forward and entire seasons changed while he sat there. He was in the height of his frustration when he noticed his bucket that was sitting beside him in the passenger seat. Fill it with patience, he began to pray. Fill it with patience. And finally, the attendant lumbered over to Bob. He had seen glaciers move faster. The attendant opened the door slowly and asked in a Texan drawl, "How was your rental car experience?" In the old days, Bob would have clocked him with the bucket and made a wisecrack to let him know that he was doing a lousy job and he had just missed his flight. And there would be no nachos with Sweet Maria. But this time, Bob had spent 25 minutes asking God to fill his bucket with patience. This time, instead of a snarky remark that came easily to mind, Bob answered, "I had a great time. The car was awesome. You're awesome. Airports are awesome. Life is awesome. I get to go home tonight. I hope you have a great day." He didn't even recognize himself. It was like a ventriloquist had his hand up his shirt and making his mouth move and saying things for him. This did not sound like Bob, and it wasn't Bob. It was that bucket full of patience doing the talking. He had missed his plane by a lot. He got out of the car with his bucket and started walking to the terminal to book a new flight. But the car attendant ran across the parking lot and put his hand on Bob's shoulders. "Hey, I just want you to know, that was a great sermon you gave at church this morning." So we can all pretend to have all the game we want while we're up on stage, in the pulpit, at work, at field, or hanging out with our church friends. But it's how we engage with the rental car attendant, the grocery store bagger, or the bank teller that really says who we are and whether we have Jesus in our hearts. People will figure out what we really believe by seeing what we actually do. As often as we try to make ourselves look otherwise, most of the time we live our lives and everything is really about us, about our busy schedules, how we're feeling, how big of a hurry we're in. So loving our neighbors, even when they are this punishing, slow rental return guy, to pull this off, we all need a bucket of patience, kindness, and understanding. We all encounter difficulties. It's what we do next that defines us. And I read a story about a waiter who was bringing a tureen full of soup to be able to feed a family style, to put the soup tureen on the table. And it was big and it was heavy, and he was carrying it with this flourish, above his head, when another waiter bumped him, and the soup just went everywhere, all over both of them. It's when we get bumped that what's in our life shows the most. It's when we've been bumped. To pull this off, we need a bucket full of patience, kindness, and understanding. Knowing things about the Bible is terrific, but I'd trade a dozen Bible studies for a bucket full of grace and patience. So in Ephesians 4, verses 1 and 2, and I guess I could click this so you can see it. Turn it on. It is on. Well, yeah, here we go. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his, oh, wait a minute, I think I skipped one. There we go. I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Have all of you been called? Amen. You've all been called to witness for Jesus. Live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. And that word completely is what blows me away. Because I can be humble and I can be gentle probably 90% of the time. But completely humble and gentle means it's going to be 24/7 every moment of every day. That's harder to do. It's got to be a God thing when that happens. If this is God's standard, who is worthy to be called? And Lord, have mercy on all of us. So here's our scripture for the morning. Who is wise and understanding among you? Let him show it by his good life, by deeds done in the humility that comes from wisdom. The Greek word that's translated good is not agathos, good, moral, and correct, but instead helos, which means beautiful and attractive. We get an attractive life, a life that attracts others to Jesus, when we have humility that comes from wisdom. And that humility permeates all of our deeds as we relate in this world. The Holman Christian Standard Bible interprets the same verse this way. The one who is wise and has understanding should show his works by good conduct with wisdom's gentleness. And it's that word gentleness or humility that's interchangeable. So true wisdom is gentle. Harsh, mean people are never wise people. They may be smart, they may even be right, but if it's not gentle, it's not wisdom. True wisdom is also humble. Arrogant people are never wise people. They may be smart, they may even be right, but if it's not humble, it's not wisdom. The Greek word interpreted as humility or gentleness in verse 13 literally meant the quality of not being overly impressed by a sense of one's self-importance. It means someone whose life is not all about themselves, which I really love that. This quality was not prized by the Greeks and is not prized right now by 21st century Americans, because humility is thought of signaling servility that's unworthy of a strong and confident person. How does humility make us wise? Or maybe we should ask it the opposite way. How does wisdom make us humble? If I were really courageous enough to admit it, I am not as significant as I think I am. And whether I am late or not is not going to rock the world. If I would understand this, I would not always need to have the last word, and I wouldn't always need to be in the fastest line. But in my woundedness and in my flesh, I delude myself into thinking that I can be harsh and I can be severe and I can be in a hurry. And it's worth it if I convince someone else of my superior worth and perspective. It says, I can be mean if I can convince you to think my way. The end justifies the means. Right or wrong? Absolutely wrong. And so if our religion ever makes us feel a little argumentative and a little harsh and a little severe, it's not God's wisdom. The gentleness that comes from wisdom means living out of the knowledge that I am not the priority here. That I have been wrong before, and there's a distinct possibility that I might be wrong again. Wow. When I combine this disquieting yet liberating truth about myself, that I am sometimes wrong, and I combine it with the awareness that each person I meet is worth far more than I ever can imagine, suddenly I'm on my way to being wise. Being aware of myself that I can be wrong, and being aware of the other, that they're made in the image of God and are of ultimate wonderful worth. It's impossible to receive the gift of God's wisdom if you're full of yourself. True wisdom is related to reality. If you think you're really something special, I heard someone say, all that and a bag of chips, better than others, the more proud and arrogant you are, the more out of touch you are with true reality. Okay? So when you meet someone who is arrogant, you know that they are really in a state of denial of some type for some reason. A wise person takes the truth, lives it humbly and unselfishly, and never considers themselves better than others. This is what makes our lives beautiful. Okay, a beautiful life comes from that humility that says, you are also in God's image. So part of this realization is that some things in life are simply gifts from God. Your IQ, your athletic skill, your musical skill, your relational skill, your eye for beauty, you name it. Part of it you inherited, and the other part was developed in the home that you grew up in. Everything special about you is a gift. So when I worked as a chaplain, I used to say, I have the gift of tears. Because if I was praying even for a stranger and their situation was really sad, I could cry. I would just relate to them, and the tears would flow. And these people would always just like, how can you just cry like that? And I would sometimes several times a day as I interacted with the patients, the tears would be coming down. Well, guess what? I inherited that from my mother, who every time she would pray, even as I was a little girl growing up, the tears would flow. Okay, is that a gift? Yes. Did I give it to myself? Absolutely not. It was a gift of God to me as part of my genetics. So, both heredity and environment that gave you what you have that's special in this world are gifts. You did not earn them. But let's say you grew up in an environment that you didn't get very many gifts, that you were left a little unprepared and a little undeveloped. You can still receive wisdom even as an older person. All you have to do is ask for it. And to ask for it is pretty wonderful. You think about James chapter 1, verse 5, where it says, if any of you lack wisdom, what can you do? Ask God, and he will not scold you. He will not scold you. But consider the context of this promise. Most of us, the way that we receive the most wisdom is, I'm not finding what I'm looking for, is through hard experiences. Pride is stupid. And if you're stupid, life is going to hurt, right? So if life is hurting, then the clue phone should be ringing. You know, that I did this to myself. This is a hard situation because I wasn't wise, I wasn't humble, I wasn't gentle. And to realize that you're a selfish sinner, that's why you're out of touch with reality. But you're never going to learn that in a sermon. I can tell you, you were selfish. It's not going to register. You're going to say, that woman is just beating us all up. It's life itself that teaches you that you are selfish. It's life itself that teaches you things that you can only learn the hard way. Trouble humbles us and helps us to recognize and realize the truth. He has to kind of humble us before we can even say that we need him and recognize that we need him. Trouble keeps us in touch with true reality, and it strengthens our faith and helps us grow spiritually. John Ortberg has an unusual way of describing this process. Every time he runs into a difficult person or a humbling experience, he reminds himself, school is in session. Okay, God is teaching me something. We can learn from every single person we meet. Do you believe that? Yes. You can learn from every single person. If you can't learn from their positive example, you can learn from their negative example, right? So here's a picture of one of Mark's favorite posters. So what is it? It's a sinking ship, and then it says, it could be that the purpose of your life is only to serve as a warning to others. Wow. You can learn by seeing other people around you whose lives are not working, and then ask, why? Why is it not working? So we especially learn from difficult people. Raise your hand if you've ever had a difficult person in your life. Raise your hand if you, at this moment, have a difficult person in your life. Yeah, right. Believe it or not, you need people like this. Difficult people help us to grow in our ability to be humble, and they force us to grow in our ability to love. Jesus put it this way. You've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I tell you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, that you may be the sons of your Father in heaven. He causes his sun, it should be S-U-N, to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and unrighteous. So, if you don't have a difficult person in your life, you can see me after the service. Because I keep a list of difficult people on file, and I can give you one of mine. Every difficult person represents a learning opportunity. School is in session. You might learn that you're still sinful enough to send a nasty email. And I'm going to tell you a story about that a little later. You might learn that you're still impatient, or that you still gossip, or that resentment finds its way back into your hardened heart. Each time you see not only the bad behavior of the difficult person, but your own response, which is less than good, you can say, thank you, Jesus, for this learning opportunity. School is in session. You're helping me to grow. You're helping me learn about my personal need for grace. And you're helping me know myself better. And as you pray about the situation, don't ever finish by saying, Jesus, help me be like you. Help me grow up to be like you. Well, a very specific opportunity to grow in self-understanding is when someone comes to have what I call a crucial conversation, where they need to tell you something about what you have done or said or who you are that's making their life not work for them. Romans 12, verse 3 tells us that we are to think of ourselves with sober judgment in accordance with the measure of faith that God has given us. We are not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought. Okay? So it is that measure of faith that's in that last phrase that helps us to know that our salvation and our standing with God is not dependent on what this other person thinks of us. True? So if they are really harsh with you, and if they are nasty with you, you can still be secure because Jesus still loves you, and he's the one who knows your heart. And he's the one that's going to be your judge. And so therefore, what this person has to tell you should not push any buttons at all. You should be able to receive it thoughtfully, humbly, and not react. We should be secure enough because we know and love Jesus and know He knows and loves us to not get our buttons pushed. And here's some good news. We are not stuck with the same lousy, selfish character that we started with. It is possible that we can grow, right? So God loves us just the way we are, but He loves us too much to leave us that way. So He gives us these learning opportunities along the way. Growth is part of the salvation process. So when someone comes and begins to give you feedback that is less than positive, that's when you have opportunity to truly represent Jesus. To listen carefully and consider prayerfully. And it takes humility, but it leads to wisdom if you can do this. This is a repeated theme throughout the book of Proverbs, and I was going to go through and count how many times it says this. But I think it's at least like 15 times the book of Proverbs said, you need to listen when people have something to tell you. He who ignores discipline despises himself, but whoever heeds correction gains understanding. So, as you are receiving feedback, you can pray, what do I need to learn, Jesus? What am I needing to learn? Okay, so let's go back to James 3. Verse 14 starts with the word but. And whenever you see the word but, it means it's contrasting two different ideas. And it's contrasting heavenly wisdom and earthly wisdom. Earthly wisdom, it says, but if you harbor bitter envy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not boast about it or deny the truth. You have to remember that James wrote this letter to believers. Unsaved people don't even try to hide their bitter envy and selfish ambition. But Christians, supposed Christians, have learned to mask it. We dress it up. We dress up jealousy and call it discernment. Or we stick a mask on selfish ambition and label it, well, it's my calling. Therefore, you better not get in my way because I'm called. Don't get in my way. And James has a weak stomach for such pretense. He says, stop playing games and look at what true wisdom is and what it has to offer. At its core, jealousy is ingratitude. It focuses on what you have that I don't. And then I want to say, but I'm just as worthy of these good things and honor as you are. Why isn't God giving me that promotion or that fancy big church full of young families? It's self-centeredness to the core to be jealous. It takes root in insecurity and it grows bitter and angry. And then you begin to build yourself up. And braggers are liars. Period. When you brag, you're trying to convince others that you're better than you are. Anybody ever do that? By what you talk about, by the stories that you tell, that you want to project this image that I've got myself together. If you hear someone building themselves up, or even worse, putting someone else down, know that they are permeated with jealousy and selfish ambition, and that it's earthly wisdom, not heavenly wisdom. And it says, this kind of wisdom does not come down from heaven, right? But that it's earthly. Earthly means from a perspective that does not take God and His kingdom into account. And the natural is unspiritual, means, again, not counting on the Spirit to do His work. And then the last one is really pretty significant. It says demonic or of the devil. Earthly wisdom tries to build itself up, and its source of building itself up is the devil himself. We often think of demonic power as playing with Ouija boards, seances, or apparitions, and somebody rapping on the inside of your wall. James brings it all a little closer to home. He says, envy, selfish ambition, boasting, and self-defensiveness are of the devil. It has our enemy's fingerprints all over them. And then the next verse says, for when you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. Now I have to say, I don't see any of this in this little congregation, but I see plenty of it in other places. But verse 17 begins with another but. Now contrasting earthly wisdom to the wisdom that is from above. This is the description of heavenly wisdom. First of all, it's pure. There's no need to spin facts. There's no need to exaggerate the statistics. So if it's not honest, completely honest and straightforward, it's not wisdom. Okay? Then it says it's peace-loving. If it's critical and picking a fight and trying to prove you're right, it's not wisdom. True wisdom is considerate, taking the needs and perspectives of others into account. And then it says, true wisdom is submissive. And you know, I am a 21st century educated woman, and I hate that word. Just got to put it out there. Submissive is not one of my favorite words. Okay? That's why I love how the King James interprets this word as easily entreated. That means willing to listen to someone else, willing to consider what they are asking. I can do that. I may not be able to be submissive, but I can be easily entreated. And in other words, it means I can listen to your concerns and requests and yield what might be best for myself to do what is best for you. Well, my kids in our family knew that they should come to me first because this is much more me than their daddy. They knew I was easily entreated whenever they had something special they wanted permission to do. In fact, they would accuse me. They would say, Mom, you are a softie. They would especially say that when I was letting their sibling do something. Mom, you are a softie. Okay, absolutely. I am a certified softie. My children say so. I am easily entreated. But that word submission is still there. And submission is about authority. It means there is kind of a pecking order, a rank in life, and there's certain people because of their place that you need to listen to, and if at all possible, do as they're asking. So when I worked in the hospital, one day the hospital president had asked me, they'd asked me to have different people do the devotionals at the hospital board meetings. And I had lined up a bunch of guests every other time I did it and every other time we had a guest. And the hospital president emailed me and said, cancel your guest, we want you. The guest was going to move away. It was our only chance to hear what she had to say. And I wrote back and said, this is the last chance to hear this person. Are you sure you want to do this? And he came to me and said, I'm the boss. I told you we want you. Cancel the guest. And I'm thinking, okay, I forgot. I'm not talking equal to equal. He is my boss. He is, and I need to submit to that. Okay, when we recognize, we don't talk back. Now, this may not seem like rocket science, but lack of respect for authority has shipwrecked many a career, lost many a job, ruined many a relationship. And it ties back to this idea of accepting feedback and actually listening carefully. Can we stay humble, open, and teachable when someone has something difficult that they're asking us to do? Can we? Are we secure enough in our relationship with Jesus to let other humans speak truth into our life and say, if you say so, I will. That's what Peter said when Jesus said, put your net down on the other side of the boat. Peter said, if you say so, I will. Well, with people in authority over us, sometimes that's what we need to do as well. Which is why you're all wearing masks, right? If you say so, I will. Well, I have a story about human wisdom and heavenly wisdom that is first person, present tense. And I'm not proud, but I am grateful about this situation. I met someone at one of our churches who liked me. And she decided that she could call me once a week and get some free counseling. And the first time that was fine, the second time that was fine, the third time, but then it wasn't just once a week, then it was a couple times a week. And there was a lot of dumping going on that I was just kind of there. Well, I had a really tortured relationship with this person because I had had some really bad encounters with someone in her family in my distant past, but I never told her that. And one day, she felt like I hadn't understood her because I was counseling her in a way that she didn't want to go, and she yelled at me. And I just said to her, I don't have to do this. You're not paying me. You're not even a member of my church. I don't have to do this. I think it's time to hang up. She sent me back this very apologetic email. And for about 4 days in my garden, I composed a really nasty email back to her. And I composed it, and I composed it, and I composed it, and finally it was a rainy day, and I sat down at my computer and I wrote it and sent it. Okay, and it was not kind. It was not gentle. It was not full of godly wisdom. And lo and behold, 4 days later, she called me and wanted counseling. And I'm thinking, you didn't get my email. You didn't get my email. What is up with this? Now it has been almost 2 months. And obviously, God interrupted that email transmission. That's grace. I was so mortified that I had been so mean to this person that really needed a friend. And after I pressed send, I was just going, oh, Lord, please, I don't know how to undo this damage that I have just unleashed. And God just said, she's not going to receive that because that's not really, truly your heart. But then I heard him say to me, but watch out. I won't do that every time. Okay, don't send any more nasty emails, Collette. Well, then, several weeks after I had sent this email, I received a really nasty email from someone else that God did not intercept. And I thought, this could really hurt. And I could really get mad, but I know that I am capable of sending nasty emails and that my heart is really not as nasty as my email was. Perhaps this other person that sent me one, I can assume the best. I can just assume that they were distressed and worked up. And because I recognize that I too am a sinner, I don't have to get resentful when I bump into the sin of someone else. And I think God works that way with us. I think sometimes he'd rather have us be humble than perfect. And he lets us sometimes do stupid things like that to wake us up to the fact that we all have growing to do, even me. School is in session. It's in session. And I hope that God will keep me in school every day until the day I die, that I will continually grow in wisdom and humility and gentleness, and that who you find me to be today is just a shadow of the spiritual, kind, gentle person that you're going to know next year or 10 years from now, because I want to grow more that way. Amen. School's in session, and it's the difficult people you encounter that give you opportunity to grow.